So the latest reports breaking is that despite saying that they hadn't made a bid, Rashane Thomas of The Athletic has confirmed that Brentford have indeed made another bid, a second bid for El Hadji Malick Diouf. The offer is rumoured to be in the region of £35 million, plus add-ons to get it to £40 million. It has also been suggested that West Ham may well accept this bid as they prepare for a replacement who's already been identified, and that is 19-year-old left-back Harry Amos from Man United. Now, there's quite a lot of debate emerging about the type of players that we're actually trying to sign, with many fans frustrated to hear that we're targeting a 39-year-old free agent in Jamie Vardy and an injury-prone Arsenal player in Reiss Nelson. Now, I've got to tell you that much to what I thought the other day, the Reiss Nelson rumours have now died down. Apparently, we're nowhere near signing him and look like we're probably not going to sign him. And I did suggest that maybe his salary, if nothing else, was a bit of an alarm bell. He's on 100 grand a week. West Ham are not going to sign a player for 100 grand a week playing in the Championship. Anyway, from what I understand, Vardy and Reiss Nelson are priorities. But if you look at some of the names now being mentioned, you've got the 19-year-old Amos from Man United, as well as Edvin Alpo, a 21-year-old winger from Norwegian club Viking. Now, both a massive difference to the likes of Jamie Vardy link. And I think the reaction to all three, Vardy, Austbo, and Amass, kind of tells you where West Ham fans are at this moment in time. Because I don't think many supporters are particularly excited at the idea of signing an aging striker like Jamie Vardy. But at the same time, I'm not seeing a huge amount of excitement over links with a young player like Edvin Alpo. And I think I understand why to a point. We're in the Championship. We're supposed to be trying to get straight back into the Premier League. So naturally, fans want players who can come in and make an immediate difference. They want someone who's already proven themselves in the Premier League or in the Championship itself. And ideally, they want players who can walk into this team and hit the ground running. The problem is those players are incredibly difficult to find. If they're good enough, everybody else wants them. If they're established Premier League players, they probably don't want to drop down to the Championship. If they're established championship players who are good enough to improve West Ham, then either they're already under contract elsewhere, or they're too expensive, or they've got several clubs chasing them. You've only got to look at the example of Jordan James. That's almost the perfect deal from a West Ham perspective. A young player who's played in the Championship, had a very good season for Leicester, and reportedly Wolves are now about to get him for just £10 million. That's the sort of signing fans want. But there aren't loads of Jordan Jameses sitting around waiting to be picked up. And that's why I think the whole Edvin Alpo and Harry Amos situations is actually much more interesting than reaction would really suggest. West Ham have reportedly had a bid of just under £8 million rejected by Viking for Edvin Alpo. They want closer to £11 million, which again is really hardly breaking the bank, I would imagine. And I think that the first thing to say about him is that he isn't some completely unknown kid who's played just a few games and then suddenly West Ham have decided to spend money on him. He's 21 years of age. He's a Norwegian under-21 international. He comes through a Viking system and has established himself in the first team. And importantly, Viking clearly don't think he's worth a mere £8 million. They've rejected bigger offers for him, reportedly from Lille, of around £10.5 million. So there's clearly a belief by the Norwegian club that this player is someone who's quite valuable and his value is likely to increase. And that's where I think we can see the Niels Koppen influence, because this is exactly the sort of player you would expect a recruitment department like Koppen's to be looking at. I've said it so many times before. Young, potential, room to develop, and hopefully, if you get it right, someone who can be worth a lot more money in a couple of years to come. Now, speaking to a Norwegian media site, the player is on record in responding to West Ham's bid. He said, I don't know how big the bid was or how much Viking are demanding, but West Ham is a cool club that is interesting enough for me. Austbo continued, I feel I've been patient for a long time now. I've given word that I want to move on, and if something comes along, then that is good enough and right for me, then I want that move. So the player himself is very keen on a move, and it looks as if West Ham is a very interesting proposition for the player himself. His primary position, before I carry on, if you're new to this channel or if you watched me before but yet to subscribe, that QR code that's appeared there in the top corner takes you to the subscription page. Why not subscribe if you enjoy the content free of charge? So his primary position is left wing. He's right-footed, so he will be a backup player for Solomon, who we just recently signed. He's small, 5'8", low centre of gravity, but technically very comfortable and capable of changing direction very quickly. He's the sort of player that can be useful against teams that will defend deep, and that's something that we're going to encounter a lot of in the Championship. So you want someone who's prepared to take on fullbacks rather than just sort of keeping possession, passing it sideways. He's a modern day winger, a player that can cut in from the left side and get the ball onto his right foot. And Austbo, very much like a Jared Bowen, very much like a Solomon, is that type of modern day winger. But is there any end product to his game? Well, he's had 75 appearances for Viking. He scored 17 goals with 13 assists. That's not bad. It's not a bad return. And maybe he would have contributed more had he not missed 13 games last season due to hamstring and groin injuries. And there you go, another player with injuries. So an injury issue is going to be, or could be, a concern. But it seems hardly these days that you're not going to get a player hasn't had some injury or another. Look, Austbo is not yet the finished article. He's still got plenty to learn in the game, such as the defensive side of his game, but that's nothing that can't be taught, especially by a coach like Nuno. So consistency would be a big challenge for the player. Technically, he's really very good. He's got good pace, good acceleration, good finishing. He creates a lot of chances, and the Championship would certainly be more demanding of him, but he does have great potential. Now we get on to Malick Diouf, because this is where things have kind of been interesting over the last few days. As I've said, Rashane Thomas of The Athletic has reported that Brentford have made a second bid. Rashane Thomas is quite, renowned, so I've got to take his word for it, but I haven't seen it anywhere else as yet. And that bid, as I've said, is £35 million, potentially rising to 40 million. Now, West Ham have already rejected one approach from Brentford, and they previously made it clear that he wasn't for sale. But 35 million rising to 40, that's serious money for a player who a lot of West Ham fans have got to be honest, flattered to deceive last season. Many fans would willingly accept almost doubling our money in a year for a player who just didn't quite deliver what was expected of him. But if Brentford are really prepared to put £40 million on the table, you've got to consider it. And you can potentially double your money on a player after one season whilst you're in the Championship. That's a conversation certainly worth having with Brentford. The question then becomes, who replaces him? And that's where Harry Amos has appeared over the last day or so. Now, Amos, only 19 years of age, left-footed. He's come through the Manchester United Academy, but he simply isn't someone that's, who's fresh, wet behind the ears. He actually spent last season in the Championship with Sheffield Wednesday. He did move halfway through the season to Norwich. However, that second half of the season was marred by, dare I say it, injuries, which restricted him, I think, to just one game for Norwich in the second half of last season. But he's got experience. He's got Championship experience, having played for Sheffield Wednesday. If you're going to be replacing a 21-year-old with a 19-year-old, at least you need to replace him with someone who's kind of played a bit of senior team football. Amos has had that experience. Man United apparently are willing to consider letting him go for a reported £6 million fee, which is, nothing really. So suddenly you've got an interesting scenario. Sell Diouf for 35 million up front, maybe 40 million with add-ons, bring in Amos for a fraction of that cost, and you've kind of got money left over to strengthen in other areas of the team. Now, I'm not saying this is definitely what's going to happen. God knows what's going on with West Ham's transfers at this moment in time. But I'm saying, and I don't even know if Amos is as good as Diouf. I don't know. He might even prove to be better. Amos is a kind of attack-minded left back, more like a wing back. He's got pace, he's got athleticism, he drives forward, and he goes at attack, he goes at defenders, and he's very comfortable in possession. Doesn't shy away from wanting the ball, and but he's another player who's still learning his trade. And this is where I completely understand why fans look at links to players like Austbo and Amass, and then the other extreme links to Vardy, and they say, God, hang on a minute, what are we trying to do here at West Ham? When it comes to these younger players, we're trying to get promoted, aren't we? So do we need to be looking at project players that have got a lot to learn? Well, that's a key argument. It's a decent argument. And if we sign these players, they're going to be part of a squad. They're not going to be players that are going to be starting every week. You're going to have the likes of Solomon starting, and you're going to have the likes of Scarl starting. So these players coming in are going to be backups rather than the mainstays of this team. But you shouldn't ignore players like this simply because they're young and have not established themselves. You kind of need a real mix. I keep saying the same thing. You need players for today, but you also need players for tomorrow as well. And this is where I think Koppen's recruitment model comes into play, because it isn't necessarily about replacing like for like. It's about identifying where the value is. And I think, this is what some supporters are going to have to get used to whilst we're in the Championship. Because if we've spent a lot of time talking about West Ham's transfer strategy in the past, about it being so shoddy, well, this is now an opportunity to demonstrate that we can go a different direction and make it work for us. Look, there are positions, I've said it again before now, there are positions that we do need to bring in players that we know are going to contribute straight away. Troy Parrott as a striker, Celtic's Arnie Engels as the creative midfielder. Those are two players that definitely we should be targeting, we should be trying to get through the door. And of course, with Crystal Palace stalling on Axel Disasi, they're stalling on a £4.4 million loan deal. Well, now that we know that Chelsea are happy to loan the player out, let's go and get him. There's your experience. You've got the likes of Parrott, who's has shown that he's capable of scoring goals in the Dutch league. You've got Celtic's Arnie Engels, who's demonstrated how good he can be on the creative side for Celtic. You've got Disasi, and then when you're looking at players like Austbo and Amass, you can see that fit. You can see how they can all fit into a squad. Look, like I said, I'm not expecting Austbo and Amass to be starters. They're going to provide depth in strength in this squad, and that suits me. And if selling Diouf helps to bring these players in, along with Engels and Disasi, then it makes even more sense to be cashing in on Malick Diouf, who really didn't deliver last season. But what we need now is real action. Too many rumours, only Veltman and Solomon to show for it so far. We don't know if chasing Austbo, Engels and Amass would be good signings or not. In fact, to be honest with you, we're not too sure whether Veltman, Solomon and Disasi would work, because as established Premier League players as Veltman and Disasi were, coming into the Championship, they could struggle. Don't see it, but it's possible. But as I always keep saying, the trick is to get the balance right. And I think that's probably where I am with the links to Austbo and Amass. They bring a freshness to the squad alongside the experience that we already have and the experience that we want to get in as well. We've been asking for a proper recruitment structure for so long. We've been asking for people to identify players before their value explodes. We want to be buying players who are like 10, 11, 12 million pounds. Well, Austbo and Amass fit that bill. they fit that profile. So I think this is really interesting thing to watch over the next week or so, is where West Ham's transfer direction takes us. I'm all for a mix of players with potential, players who can increase in value, who can be signed alongside seasoned professionals who know the Championship, and perhaps one or two Premier League players coming on loan who are prepared to take a step down to play for West Ham would also be good. If that's what happens, then I think we can start saying that the Koppen model is finally taking shape. But if we end up replacing experienced players with youngsters only and relying on them entirely on potential, then of course I think we're going to struggle. And as supporters, we'll have every right to be concerned whether we can win promotion back to the Premier League or not. There's more to come. There's Gassa. Apparently, we're hearing that he's now available for sale, which I think is hugely disappointing. We know Aaron Wan-Bissaka, with apparently Aston Villa and Everton fighting over him. So there's more to come. The last few weeks of this transfer window is going to be pretty crucial. We've got to get players in, though. As much as we're selling players, and that's all very well, getting big money for them, we've got to get players in. If we get these youngsters in, I don't mind. I think, as backup players, as support, as players in the squad, absolutely, why not? Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Do become a subscriber. Hit the like button. Hit the bell notification to let you know when I'm next on. And there's a hype button there as well. Would be great if you can hit that too. I'll be back soon. See you all soon.